They set her up as a joke on a blind date, but the single dad CEO millionaire froze everyone by proposing. Jenna adjusted her cardigan sleeves nervously as she stepped off the bus and onto the stone-paved sidewalk in front of Rosewood Bistro. The golden lights of the upscale restaurant flickered against the fading twilight, and every part of her body screamed at her to turn around. She clutched her phone tightly, glancing once more at the message Clara had sent. "Just go in, Jen. He's already there. I swear it's not as bad as it sounds." Jenna Harper, 26, had once believed in the kind of love you read about in books. That belief had crumbled 2 years ago when she discovered her boyfriend of 3 years had used her savings money she had set aside to help her ailing mother to fund a tech startup. A month later, he left not just her, but the city with her best friend. Since then, she had built a wall around herself. Her life became quiet. Mornings numbers on spreadsheets, grocery runs for her mother, and evenings spent reading beside her in the hospital room. Love, she had decided, was a luxury people like her could no longer afford. So when Vanessa, the loudest voice in the office and the queen of passive-aggressive smirks, insisted that someone wanted to meet Jenna, she knew something was off. "He's into quiet girls," Vanessa had said with a sly grin. "Single dad, a little older, harmless. He actually begged me for your number." The giggles that followed weren't subtle, neither were the sidelong glances. Jenna had immediately declined. Blind dates weren't her thing, especially ones arranged by someone who clearly didn't like her. But Clara, her one real friend at work, had taken her aside that afternoon, her face slightly pale. "Look, they're making a game of it," Clara admitted. "They've booked a table for you and this guy at Rosewood. Vanessa is planning to be there. I tried to get you out of it, but she made it look like I was the one who set it up." "So it's a joke?" Jenna had asked flatly, her throat tightening. Clara had looked at the floor. "I think so, but the guy, he might not know. Or maybe he does. I don't know, Jen, but I swear I didn't mean for it to go this far." In the end, out of a strange mix of pride and quiet anger, Jenna had agreed to go. She told herself it was better to show up, get it over with, and walk away with her head high. Clara had come with her to the restaurant door, then lingered outside, too ashamed to go in. Now, standing at the entrance, Jenna inhaled deeply and stepped inside. The hostess led her past rows of softly candlelit tables and right toward the corner where she spotted the table Vanessa had reserved. As she approached, she saw him, a man already seated, but he wasn't alone. Sitting beside him in a little booster seat was a tiny girl, maybe 4 years old, with a head full of brown curls and a plush bunny clutched tightly in her arms. Jenna froze. That was when she heard it snickering. To her right, just 2 tables away, Vanessa sat with 3 other co-workers, all pretending to sip their drinks while glancing at their phones. One of them had their camera pointed casually in Jenna's direction. "Oh my God," one whispered, just loud enough for Jenna to hear. "He actually brought his kid. This is unreal. Who brings a toddler to a blind date?" Another laughed, the cringe level maximized. Jenna's face burned. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her ears. Every instinct told her to walk away, to bolt for the door. But the little girl had looked up from her bunny and smiled at her, a smile so innocent and pure it cut straight through the embarrassment. The man stood when he saw her pulling out the chair across from him. He had kind eyes, deep set, tired maybe, but kind. His shirt was plain, his hair slightly tousled, not at all the creepy older guy image Vanessa had painted. "Hi," he said gently. "You must be Jenna. I'm Brian, and this," he gestured to the child, "is Sophie." Jenna looked from him to Sophie, who gave her a tiny wave, then back to Brian. The snickering from the other table buzzed in her ears like static. She sat down, and with that one quiet act of defiance, the laughter behind her began to falter. Jenna shifted in her seat, smoothing her skirt as she tried to steady her breathing. She kept her gaze down, but she could feel the heat of stares and snickers from the nearby table. She could hear Vanessa's voice. "Too loud to be accidental, I mean really." Vanessa laughed. "She's actually sitting there with that guy and his kid." Jenna clenched her hands under the table, forcing herself to ignore it. Across from her, Brian adjusted Sophie's little sweater as the girl munched quietly on a breadstick, humming a tune only she understood. He looked up and met Jenna's eyes with a calm, almost apologetic smile. "Again, I'm really sorry about this," he said softly. "I know this probably isn't what you were expecting. My babysitter canceled last minute. I nearly called to cancel too." He paused, seeming unsure whether to continue, then added, "But I really didn't want to miss meeting you." Jenna blinked, caught off guard. There was no arrogance in his voice, no defensiveness, just sincerity. "It's okay," she replied, her voice lower than she intended. Really, it wasn't, at least not at first. The setup was humiliating, the whispers behind her insufferable. But there was something about Brian's presence that disarmed her. He was tall, yes, but not in an intimidating way. His features carried a quiet weariness, laugh lines around his eyes, a small scar near his temple, like a man who had lived 1,000 lives before sitting at this table. He wore a plain dark button-down shirt and jeans, nothing flashy. Everything about him felt grounded. And then there was Sophie. The little girl sat still for a moment, then reached into her tiny backpack and pulled out a small pad of paper and a purple crayon. She glanced up at Jenna, then began to draw with intense focus. Brian leaned slightly closer across the table. "She loves to draw mostly princesses and dinosaurs, sometimes both." Jenna smiled despite herself. "That's a very unique combination." "She has range," Brian added with a chuckle. A few moments passed in silence. Jenna began to relax her shoulders, lowering inch by inch. The restaurant's soft lighting cast a warm glow across the table. The clinking of forks and quiet hum of conversations filled the space around them, but Jenna found herself focusing more on the way Brian occasionally glanced at Sophie, always gently attentive, always present. Sophie finally held up her paper and beamed. "Look!" she chirped, waving it toward Jenna. Jenna took the picture with both hands. It was a crayon drawing of a blonde girl in a long purple gown, complete with sparkles and a golden crown. "Is this me?" she asked, surprised. "Yes." Sophie nodded. "You look like a princess." Jenna's throat tightened unexpectedly. "She doesn't say that often," Brian added, watching his daughter with clear affection. "Her usual favorite is a triceratops named Rosie." Jenna laughed, quietly touched. "I'm honored." She was about to say more when movement caught her eye. One of the women from Vanessa's table stood and began walking toward them, feigning casualness as she approached. "Oh, hey," the woman said with mock surprise. "I didn't know you were into this kind of thing." Jenna's smile faltered. The woman looked directly at Sophie, then back at Jenna. "I mean, you must know you're the kind of girl who ends up on dates with single dads, right? Kind of perfect, actually." Jenna froze. Before she could respond, Brian stood up slowly, still calm but firm. He gently placed one hand on Sophie's small shoulder and then looked the woman in the eyes. "I'm proud to be a father," he said evenly. "And I know how to respect the woman sitting across from me far more than anyone at that table seems to." The woman's smirk faltered. She blinked, scoffed, and turned away. Brian sat back down, looking across the table at Jenna again. "Sorry about that." Jenna didn't speak for a moment. She just looked at him. Truly looked. And something inside her shifted. This wasn't a joke, not to him, not to Sophie, and maybe not to her anymore either. She folded the drawing and gently placed it into her purse like it was something precious. Dinner arrived not long after the interruption. The tension in Jenna's chest slowly eased as the voices from the nearby table faded. Sophie now focused on arranging her French fries into what she proudly called a crown for the princess was a charming distraction. Jenna couldn't help but watch Brian. He wasn't overly charming or rehearsed. There was something steady about him, quiet, sincere. He asked thoughtful questions about her day, her hobbies, even whether she preferred sunrises or sunsets. "No one's asked me that in a long time," Jenna admitted. Brian smiled. "Sometimes the little things tell you the most." She chose sunsets. They feel like a quiet goodbye after a long day." He nodded, understanding more than she said. Then he shared something unexpected. "My wife passed away 3 years ago," he said, cutting Sophie's food. "Ovarian cancer. It was fast. She was diagnosed late." Jenna's heart dropped. "I'm so sorry." Brian gave a soft smile. "Thanks. Sophie was just one. She remembers her mostly through stories now." He paused. "I haven't dated since. Honestly, this is my first time trying again." There was no pity in his tone, just quiet truth from someone still healing. "Then we're both first-timers?" Jenna said. "At least in a long while." She didn't explain more, but something in Brian's gaze told her he sensed there was pain behind her smile too. After dinner, Brian suggested dessert. "They have great homemade ice cream," he said with a hopeful grin. Sophie lit up instantly. Soon they were sharing 2 small bowls, vanilla for Jenna and Sophie dark chocolate for Brian. Sophie giggled between bites, announcing that she was the ice cream princess and her kingdom was sticky. Jenna joined in as the royal knight of sprinkles, and Brian without hesitation became Sir Napkin Keeper of Clean Hands. Their laughter came easily. Jenna couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this light, this free. When the server brought the check, Jenna instinctively reached for her wallet. She knew how this had been set up, an expensive restaurant, a joke meant to embarrass her, and Brian didn't seem like someone wealthy. But as she opened her purse, Brian gently stopped her. "Please," he said. "Let me." Jenna hesitated. "I know what this place costs," he added with a soft smile. "I said yes because I wanted to be here with you." There was no pride in his voice, just quiet conviction. He'd seen her impulse to contribute not from expectation, but sincerity. In that moment, something passed between them. Mutual respect, quiet trust. Outside, the night air had cooled. Brian carried Sophie in one arm as they walked Jenna to her building. The little girl blinked sleepily, her crown of fries long forgotten. At the corner, Sophie stirred and reached out to Jenna, wrapping her small arms around her neck. "You made Daddy smile a lot tonight," she whispered. "He smiles more when you're here." Jenna hugged her back, her heart tight. She looked at Brian. His eyes were tired but warm, grateful. They said goodbye in soft tones, unspoken promises hanging in the air. Jenna walked the final blocks alone, Sophie's drawing still tucked safely in her purse like something sacred. When she got home, she leaned against the door and finally let the tears come not from sadness, but from something else, relief. Later that night, she picked up her phone and typed 2 simple words, "Thank you." A few minutes later, his reply lit up the screen. "Thank you for not walking away when you saw me with my daughter." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Jenna went to sleep smiling. In the days that followed, Jenna found herself smiling at her phone more than she had in years. What started with a simple thank you message became a slow but steady stream of texts. Good mornings, shared articles, silly photos of Sophie playing dress-up, and quiet confessions in the late hours of the night. They didn't talk every moment, but when they did, it felt different, real, like opening a window in a room that had been sealed shut for too long. On Saturday morning, Brian invited her to a children's art exhibition at the Maplewood Community Center. "Sophie's been working on something she wants to show you," he said, his voice hopeful. "She'll be devastated if you're not there." Jenna smiled as she read the message. "I'll be there," she replied without hesitation. The center was tucked between a library and a community garden, modest from the outside but warm and welcoming within. Paper butterflies hung from the ceiling. Walls were lined with colorful handprints, and a small band of kids was playing off-key music on plastic instruments near the entrance. Brian greeted her with Sophie on his hip, the little girl dressed in a pink tutu and tiara, clearly taking the event very seriously. "She's been talking about this all week," Brian said as he sat Sophie down. "Come on, let me show you." They led Jenna into the main room where dozens of children's paintings were displayed on easels. Some were stick figures, others wild splashes of color, but each piece pulsed with innocence. Sophie tugged Jenna's hand excitedly. This one's mine. The painting was simple but unmistakably heartfelt. A little girl in a purple dress holding hands with two adults. One figure looked like Brian, the other blonde and smiling in a soft yellow dress was clearly meant to be Jenna. Scrolled across the top in chunky red letters were the words, "Mommy too." Jenna's throat tightened. She bent down to Sophie's level. "Is that me?" Sophie nodded proudly. "You help Daddy smile. That's what mommies do." Brian looked down, his face unreadable for a moment, then turned away slightly, pretending to fix the strap on Sophie's shoe. Jenna could tell he was holding something back. They spent the next hour exploring the rest of the exhibit. Jenna noticed how every teacher, every parent, every volunteer seemed to know Brian not just as Sophie's dad, but as someone important. They shook his hand with reverence. A few even thanked him, though Jenna wasn't sure why. Afterward, while Sophie joined a coloring circle, Jenna and Brian stood near a coffee table in the corner sipping lukewarm tea from paper cups. "This place is really lovely," she said. "It's been a second home for Sophie," Brian replied, "especially after everything." "She's lucky to have you," Jenna said. He looked at her for a long second, then gave a small shrug. "I just do what I can." Something about his tone stirred a quiet curiosity in Jenna. She didn't want to pry, but there were details that didn't quite add up. He always paid for meals but never bragged. His apartment, which she had briefly seen from a photo, was modern and minimalist. He dressed simply, yet everything he wore was well made. His words were humble, but his quiet confidence suggested a man used to responsibility and leadership. As they left the center, Sophie asleep in his arms, Jenna noticed Brian's phone buzz. He unlocked it to check a message, and for the briefest second, Jenna's eyes caught something, an email address displayed at the top of the screen. It wasn't just any email. It had the domain of a prominent investment firm she'd heard about on the news, one of the biggest in the country, the kind that only executives and board members used. Brian noticed her glance. Their eyes met. She didn't say anything. He smiled gently. "You saw it, didn't you?" Jenna hesitated, then nodded. He didn't flinch, didn't deflect. "I try to keep that part of my life quiet," he said calmly. "People tend to treat you differently once they know you're a CEO," she said quietly. "Yes," he answered. "Technically, I'm the founder of the firm that funds this center, among other things." Jenna looked back at the building, then at him, speechless. Brian shifted Sophie slightly in his arms, then looked at Jenna again softly, almost with gratitude. "You looked at me like I was just a dad trying to keep it together," he said. "And that's the most valuable thing anyone's done for me in years." Jenna sat at her kitchen table staring into a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the refrigerator. Yet inside her mind a storm raged, doubt, fear, shame. The more time she spent with Brian and Sophie, the more the weight in her chest grew. Brian was kind, present, and generous without ever boasting. And Sophie, sweet, bright-eyed Sophie, had found her way into Jenna's guarded heart like sunlight through cracked blinds. But even as they grew closer, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. Brian was the founder of a major investment firm, a man who quietly funded community centers and moved in circles far beyond her world. She was just a junior accountant with no savings, a sick mother, and a past shaped by betrayal. He deserved someone polished, accomplished, not someone who had been used, discarded, and left picking up the pieces. And Sophie deserved someone who didn't flinch when she accidentally called her mommy. So Jenna began to pull away. She answered Brian's texts a little later each time. She made excuses to avoid dinner. She skipped their Sunday plans with no offer to reschedule. She told herself it was for the best, that she was protecting them from her inevitable shortcomings. Then came the final blow. Vanessa has always found a way to ruin what she didn't understand. Somehow, she'd found out about Jenna and Brian, maybe through gossip or a glimpse in the park. One morning, Jenna walked into the office to find stares following her like shadows. When she checked her phone, she saw the post a picture of her crouched beside Sophie tying the little girl's shoe. The caption read, "Some women will play house with anyone just to feel needed. Cringe." The comments were worse laughing emojis, snide remarks, and a few fake "hope you're okay" messages from co-workers who had never spoken a kind word to her. That night, Jenna couldn't sleep. By morning, she had drafted her resignation and handed it in without a word, telling no one except Clara. When Clara showed up at her apartment days later with takeout in hand and fire in her eyes, Jenna tried to pretend she was asleep on the couch. Clara didn't buy it. "You quit your job," she demanded, dropping the food on the table. "You ghosted Brian. Are you seriously running from the only good thing that's happened to you in years?" Jenna sat up slowly. "You wouldn't understand." "Then make me," Clara snapped. Jenna's voice cracked. "He's everything I'm not: generous, powerful, stable. I'm just someone he feels sorry for. And Sophie, if I let her love me, I'll just end up hurting her too." Clara stared at her. "He never once treated you like a pity project. He sees you. He chose you. And Sophie, that girl lights up when you walk in the room." Jenna looked away. Clara's voice softened, but her words hit hard. "You're not afraid of failing, Jenna. You're afraid of being loved for real, no strings, no conditions. That terrifies you." Jenna said nothing. But when Clara left, she cried for the first time in weeks. The next evening, there was a knock at the door. When Jenna opened it, Brian stood there, Sophie nestled against his shoulder, her pink bunny dangling from her hand. He didn't speak at first. His eyes met hers, searching, calm, steady. "I didn't come to argue," he said gently. "I just needed to see you, one last time, if that's all you'll let me have." Jenna couldn't find her voice. Her eyes burned. Sophie squirmed from his arms and stepped forward, holding out a folded piece of paper. "This is for you," she said, placing it in Jenna's hands. "It's our family. You're in it." With trembling fingers, Jenna unfolded the drawing. There they were, Sophie, Brian, and her drawn in vibrant crayon, all holding hands beneath a rainbow that arched clumsily over their heads. The tears came then, sudden and uncontrollable, and for the first time she wasn't sure if she was falling apart or finally coming back together. The ballroom buzzed with the chatter of hundreds of women, the air filled with anticipation and perfume. The Women Who Rise Conference was one of the city's most celebrated events, an annual gathering spotlighting stories of strength, healing, and hope. Jenna hadn't planned on attending this year, but Clara had insisted. "You need to be reminded of who you are," Clara had said, firmly handing Jenna the ticket, "and maybe of what you still deserve." So Jenna had come dressed simply, sitting near the back, clutching a program she hadn't even glanced at. She tried to focus as panelists spoke about overcoming addiction loss and failure, but her mind wandered. Her heart still hurt from the way she'd pulled away from Brian, from Sophie, from something that had felt dangerously close to happiness. The MC's voice cut through her thoughts. And now we're honored to introduce our final speaker of the day, a man whose quiet contributions have changed lives across this city, the founder of the Hope Sparks Foundation, Mr. Brian Morgan. Jenna's fingers went cold. Applause thundered around her, but she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Brian walked onto the stage in a navy suit, crisp and calm. But when his eyes swept the crowd and landed on her, he paused just for a moment. Then he smiled. "Good afternoon," he began. "I'll keep this brief because this conference isn't about me. It's about you, all of you, the women who keep moving forward even when the world tells you to stop." Jenna's heart pounded. Brian's voice was steady, but there was a softness to it, a vulnerability she recognized. "I started Hope Sparks after I lost my wife," he said. "I needed a reason to keep showing up, to stay grounded, for my daughter, for myself. What I didn't expect was to find something that would spark again in me." He glanced down at his notes, then closed the folder. "And sometimes life surprises you in the most unexpected ways." And then, without a word, he stepped down from the stage. The ballroom hushed. Every eye followed him as he walked past rows of seats toward the very back of the room toward her. Jenna's breath caught. He stopped in front of her, and in one smooth motion, Brian dropped to one knee. The silence was deafening. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it, not to reveal a giant diamond, but a simple, elegant gold band, understated meaningful. He looked up at her eyes, shining. "Jenna," he said, his voice steady low. "The day they made a joke out of my daughter, you sat down anyway. You saw past the setup, past the whispers. You made a little girl feel seen, and you made me believe again. You turned their cruelty into the kindest moment of my life. And since then, every moment with you has only proven what I already knew that night." He took a breath. "Jenna, would you be the first person to call me husband again since the day I lost everything?" She turned away. Her gut clenched. The room was still. Not a cough, not a whisper. Jenna pressed her hand to her mouth, overcome. She stood on shaking legs, tears streaming down her face. He didn't speak. She couldn't, but she nodded. Once, twice, and that was enough. The room erupted, cheers, applause, cries of joy. People stood to their feet clapping as Brian rose and wrapped his arms around her. Just then, from the side aisle, a tiny figure ran forward, pink tutu fluttering. "Sophie!" She launched herself into Jenna's arms, burying her face in her side. "Does this mean?" Sophie asked through a giggly, tear-mixed voice. "I have a mommy now." Jenna knelt down, her arms wrapping around the little girl. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You do." Brian crouched beside them, resting a hand on Jenna's back, the other on Sophie's tiny shoulder. And in the middle of the crowd, under stage lights and applause, three people held each other, not as strangers bound by coincidence, but as something closer, something whole, something called family. The little house on Maple Lane was always filled with light, not just from the wide windows or the afternoon sun that spilled across the wooden floors, but from laughter, from stories told around the dinner table, from the quiet joy of three people learning how to belong to one another. Jenna had moved in just 2 weeks after the proposal, her things folded neatly into boxes, her heart still overwhelmed by how quickly life had shifted. But Brian made space for her, not just in his home, but in every part of his life. And Sophie, well, Sophie had already made space for her long ago. Every morning, Jenna helped pack Sophie's lunch, slipping in little drawings or notes, just like Brian once told her his late wife used to do. And every night after story time and goodnight kisses, Jenna would find herself tucked into Brian's arms, amazed that she could feel this safe, this secure. But the most surprising part of it all wasn't just the love, it was the purpose. With Brian's encouragement, Jenna took a leap she never imagined. Together, they launched a free art program for underprivileged children at the same community center where Sophie's Mommy 2 painting had once hung. The program was simple paint, draw, dream, for kids who had seen too much, been through too much, and needed a place to simply be. Brian didn't just fund it, he stepped back. "This is yours," he told her one morning, handing her the full project folder. "You have the heart for it, the vision. I'm just the guy who signs the checks." But Jenna knew better. Behind every canvas and colored pencil was a man who believed in second chances. Not just for himself, but for her, for Sophie, for every child who walked through those center doors. He gave her the title of project director, then quietly updated the internal documents for Hope Sparks, naming Jenna as the new executive director. "Are you sure?" she asked, stunned. "I trust you more than anyone," he said. "Besides, you've already changed lives, starting with mine." And so, in a corner of the world once marked by pain, Jenna found a kind of healing she never thought possible through art, through children, through love, quietly lived day by day. In every brushstroke, every whispered thank you, and every smile from Sophie, Jenna knew this was what rebuilding looked like. Not from grand gestures, but from steady, unwavering kindness. The soft clinking of cutlery, the warm hum of quiet conversations, and the familiar glow of low-hanging lights made Rosewood Bistro feel exactly the same. Yet for Jenna, everything had changed. She stepped through the door, hand in Brian's, her golden hair curled gently over her shoulders. A year ago, she had walked into this place with dread in her stomach and the weight of humiliation looming. Now she walked in with love beside her and peace in her chest. Sophie had stayed home that evening with her grandmother, proudly declaring she was too grown up now for boring restaurants and insisting they go on a family picnic tomorrow instead. The hostess looked up from her stand and smiled in recognition. "You're back," she said warmly. "Same table." Brian nodded, and the woman led them toward the back, toward the corner table by the window, the very one where a blind date and a cruel joke had started it all. Jenna sat down slowly, her eyes sweeping over the space like it was a memory she'd only just made peace with. "Can't believe it's been a year," she murmured. Brian reached across the table, lacing his fingers with hers. "Feels like yesterday." They ordered simply, laughed easily, spoke softly, and when the plates were cleared and the dessert menu politely declined, Jenna leaned in, her voice quieter. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "About how it all started?" Brian looked around the room for a moment, then back at her. "Sometimes," he said, "but not the way you'd think." Jenna tilted her head. "Do you ever feel angry that they tried to make me the punchline of a joke, that they dragged Sophie into it?" Brian's eyes softened. He reached for her hand again, squeezing gently. "No," he said without hesitation, "because if they hadn't, I wouldn't have found you." He smiled, then a genuine smile. "If it took a stupid, petty joke to lead me to the most sincere thing I've ever known, then I can't hate how it started." Jenna blinked against the sting in her eyes. He leaned in closer. "Sometimes the best things in life come wrapped in the worst disguises." She laughed quietly, brushing her thumb along his. "And sometimes," she whispered, "you find forever at a table meant for heartbreak." Brian nodded, then kissed the back of her hand. "Happy anniversary, sweetheart." And under the soft glow of the same lights at the same table, what began as a setup, meant to humiliate, had become the most beautiful beginning of all. If this story touched your heart even just a little, if you believe that kindness can heal and that love can grow from the most unexpected places, then don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more powerful tales that remind us what truly matters. We share real emotional and inspiring stories that speak to the soul stories, just like Jenna Brian and little Sophie's. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that move the world. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with us for stories that heal. This is Soul-Stirring Stories. See you in the next one.